You ever seen Robert Crumb's representations of bird-headed women?
No, I haven't.
Robert Crumb's an underground cartoonist, and he was the feature of a documentary which you and everybody else who's listening to this should definitely watch. It's the best documentary I've ever seen about anything ever. He draws these women. He was a loser in high school by his own admission, by every single category you could possibly generate. And so it's a study in loser psychology, but it's really complex because he was a loser who was extremely intelligent and unbelievably creative, and who had two brothers who were probably more intelligent, more creative than him, although also more psychopathological. And then he became successful. He was one of the establishers of underground cartooning back in the 1960s, and spawned arguably even graphic novel. I mean, he's a major player in that niche, and the documentary is a brilliant analysis of the relationship between failure and success, and sexual failure and sexual success. Because in one more memorable scene, he talks about, he drew this card when he was a high school kid of a heart being ripped apart when he got rejected by this girl or by all girls. He said he was beneath contempt. He wasn't even in the category of comprehensible dating partner, right? He was outside the game entirely. So he's rejected by the feminine as such. He draws these pictures of bird-headed women with teeth, and they're powerful, big thighs, big rear end, like powerful, physically powerful, intimidating women, like mothers. Draws sometimes these characters of little tiny men climbing up the legs of these huge tree-like women, but they're very aggressive and domineering. And the reason for that, at least in part, is because every woman he ever approached was rejecting and aggressive in the extreme, treated him with nothing but contempt. And then he says in an unbelievably memorable piece of the documentary, that all changed when I got successful. And you can just hear the resentment and the bitterness in his voice, even though it did change. And he wasn't that old when he became successful. He was in his mid-20s. Plenty of time to be on the outs completely and to experience life at the bottom of the male dominance hierarchy and even farther down the female dominance hierarchy, let's say, in terms of desirable men. It's called Crumb, the documentary. I would highly recommend it. And it's absolutely brilliant study. And he had an authoritarian father and an indulgent mother. And she plays a key role in the documentary. And it's awful. It's awful. It's a study in Freudian psychopathology that's deep beyond belief. I've seen it like 40 times, showing it to my classes and walking through it clip by clip. But anyways, it's a study. You don't see the world from the perspective of down and out male loser. There are subcultures that sort of exist there, but this is the only examination of that place in the world I've ever seen that I thought really, really nailed it. The documentarist was a friend of the family, so and Charles' brothers, one of them ended up a sexual offender who lived on the streets of San Francisco, and the other committed suicide by drinking furniture polish when he was like 55, after being bullied terribly in high school and living in his mother's basement, essentially, for his entire life. Ugh, awful, awful. But, you watch the documentary, it's not like people really, you generate some compassion for the people in the documentary and what they've gone through. But I wouldn't say that compassion is what's primarily elicited by the documentary. And that goes back to this discussion we had right at the beginning about, what kind of empathy we have for the men who aren't making it. And the answer seems to be very, very little. Let's go to social policy with that. We might ask, okay, in light of this, what do we do? And I would say this is what I've recommended. I've recommended to young men that that these are the facts on the ground and they're not going to change. And that if you're being rejected chronically by women, or if you're terrified out of your mind about that, and perhaps rightly so, you should take a good hard look at yourself and see what it is that you have to offer. And so, are you as educated as you could be? Are you working? are you looking for a job at least? Are you trying to get out of your parents' house? Are you taking the steps necessary to become gainfully employed, productive, generous, and attractive? And, that tangles us back up with something we also talked about in the beginning, which is the criticisms that have been directed my way by men, which is, well, you're asking men to live up to a stereotype that essentially undermines and devalues the vast majority of them. You're part of the problem, not part of the solution. And your emphasis on responsible marriage, given the state of current family law, is nothing short of reprehensible. And so, my approach is do what you can at the individual level to put yourself in the game. But there's much more to the story than that.